And Charlie Kirk had to finally address that. And he would swing back and forth. He would make disgusting statements denying famine in Gaza. And then the next thing you know, he's platforming the most popular critics of Israel. And they told me that he hated Netanyahu, that he considered Netanyahu a bully. And he actually complained of moral blackmail.
Max Blumenthal just exposed Charlie Kirk's love-hate relationship with Israel in the final days of his life, and in this clip he talks about the high-level pressure campaign against him by some of his most ardent Zionist donors, and what that means in terms of his assassination, and the dynamics playing out in the American right now that are causing a divide. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Something changed. Basically, our country's changing. But Charlie Kirk started to change, at least on this one issue, because of the branding of the movement that he had sort of, become a leader within. America first, make America great again. Donald Trump comes to the fore and is sort of representing this backlash of anger about not just the predominance of liberalism within established institutions, but also anger at the economic crisis, the housing collapse, which went unaddressed in the Obama administration with the bankers bailed out, the Iraq war. There were a lot of populist elements within the Trump coalition. And once it became clear, especially after October 7th, that Israel was playing a malign role, not only within our country, that it had the ability through its cutouts in Washington and across the country to dictate policy decisions, including decisions that counteracted American interests, that undermined American interests, but that it basically controlled Donald Trump. A new movement started to emerge, first during Donald Trump's first term within the conservative right-wing grassroots, and they took it directly to Charlie Kirk. This first played out through the TPUSA campus tours, the campus tours of the organization Charlie Kirk ran with an $80 million budget to propagandize college students behind the guise of debate. And right-wing activists from a group called the Groypers would line up at the microphone to challenge Charlie Kirk from the right on the U.S. relationship with Israel, bringing up things like the Israeli deliberate attack on the USS Liberty, basically a spy ship of the U.S. Navy, around the Suez Crisis in 1967, killing over 60 U.S. sailors.
Actually, the USS Liberty affair killed 34 sailors and many more were wounded, but he's right about everything. I think this is a great conceptualization of where the right is headed, seeing that, populism is at the heart of Trump's campaign, saying that the elites sold us out, down the river, and we have to drain the swamp, and America first is our mantra, right? But then they see the fact that the Trump administration is so beholden and controlled, it seems, by Israel, by AIPAC, and the Israel lobby, by Miriam Adelson's $100 million donation. And you could see that from Trump's first term. And this has had to be grappled with by conservatives, especially on the dissident right, and how they're going to handle this. He's right about what he's talking about regarding debate. I have a more charitable view about some of those debates. It wasn't all concerning foreign policy, certainly so. Not even, probably the majority of the debate questions that Charlie took and talked on at those campuses pertain to Israel. But the Groyper War is what he's talking about in 2019, where people did challenge Charlie Kirk, I think rightfully so, on the issue of Israel and why the U.S. should be tied at the hip to Israel and everything.
And Charlie Kirk would just shut down the debate immediately. At one point, he actually brought up the fact that Israel allows gay pride parades in Tel Aviv as a point of defending Israel, which, I mean, he's not pro-gay in the US. So it really exposed him as kind of a phony in front of his own base.
Yeah, that's always been the most ridiculous argument from people that are on the right and have traditional cultural values such as that. And you're going to use that as a talking point to promote Israel, that they have that. I mean, a charitable view of this might be that, hey, they allow this and some other countries don't allow this. So, hey, that's a more open society. But I wouldn't want to promote something even if I didn't want to throw people in cages for that activity if I thought it was deplorable. For instance, like prostitution. I don't go out there and tout the merits of prostitution, but I don't want people, either paying for those services or yielding those services to go behind bars and get apprehended for that. I think that's a victimless crime. So this is a weird argument to me, certainly. So I think Max is right.
And it wasn't popular. After October 7th, the bottom starts to fall out among people under 35 in the US for supporting Israel. I mean, it wasn't just the genocide. It was, although that was a major factor on the left within the sort of progressive grassroots, but on the right, it was really the spectacle of Netanyahu just dominating the United States and being welcomed as the real leader every time he came to Washington, getting more standing ovations than the president, and clearly trying to drive the US into a war with Iran. And
Yeah, this is totally right. I mean, the kind of reception that Netanyahu gets in Congress, I don't think any U.S. president would get that. That really shows you, the uniparty at its worst, how bipartisan in the worst way this adulation and adherence to Israel first is. We saw that in exactly what Max is talking about. And again, this stuff, is being noticed, even including on the right side of the aisle that has not been as good on Israel as the left, certainly so. And the fact that they're trying to ram down hate speech laws on the basis that, critiquing Israel is anti-Semitic, it just screams of liberal wokeness. The same bludgeons they used against people saying that, men can't get pregnant and there's not 52 genders, they would just be called racist or sexist. Well, they're doing that with anti-Semitism now, and people are noticing. That's what's turning a lot of people off of this Israel first mentality, as it spills into our domestic life too.
Charlie Kirk had to finally address that. And he would swing back and forth. He would make disgusting statements denying famine in Gaza. And then the next thing you know, he's platforming the most popular critics of Israel within the conservative movement. Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, comic Dave Smith, a libertarian anti-Zionist Jewish comedian, was debating on stage at TPUSA's Student Action Summit in Tampa, Florida last July. Megyn Kelly was speculating that, the former Fox News host was speculating that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad asset. And following that summit, Charlie Kirk fell under enormous pressure from the donors who had made him who he was, who had been funding him ever since he founded TPUSA in 2012. Donors like Robert Shillman, who is one of the most extreme pro-Israel donors in the US. Anything he donates to, he does so simply to make sure that the United States and that particularly Republican-oriented institutions do whatever Netanyahu and Israel wants.
Yeah, that's perfectly explained by Max. That is true. Charlie Kirk did waver from time to time on issues related to Israel. He was wavering on the idea that if you criticize Israel, that's anti-Semitic. You can see his frustration dealing with that topic on Megyn Kelly on August 6th. And if you want a really good 1 hour kind of summary of where Charlie was on Israel, he would double down on Hasbara propaganda regarding the genocide and starvation. And then in the same interview, talk about the frustrations he was dealing with for critiquing Israel in minor ways on that Megyn Kelly episode. And right here, here's an example of him doing that, doubling down on the Hasbara propaganda and saying, no, Israel's not starving Gaza. This was from July 28th, just shortly before he went on Megyn Kelly's show and shortly before the summit at the Hamptons with Bill Ackman. Here it is.
I hate being lied to, and I hate being propagandized. And this weekend, there was an all-out propaganda campaign trying to make it seem as if Israel is intentionally starving the people of Gaza. I hate being lied to, especially by the media networks. They lied to us about COVID. They lied to us about the vaccines. They lied to us about open borders. They lied to us on Hunter Biden laptop. Joining us now is Rabbi Walicki.
And then he has a rabbi on to give all the Hasbara and Zionist propaganda, throwing to the wayside the idea that it's starvation. Well, if I was critical, and I won't be too critical of a dead man right now, but, if he hates lying and propaganda, Israel is the source of a lot of it. And Israel and the U.S. collaboration in terms of foreign policy is a lot of it. But Max is right about this.
And Shillman grew outraged that Charlie Kirk was allowing this to take place at his events. So too did, I think, other donors like Bill Ackman were worried and wanted to make sure that Tucker Carlson didn't speak at another Charlie Kirk event. Bill Ackman was mocked on stage. This is one of the key billionaire Zionist cutouts for Netanyahu in the United States, sort of financial manager. He was mocked on stage at a TPUSA event by Tucker Carlson as a scam artist who basically made his money out of nothing and had no talents and contributed nothing to society. And Ackman wanted Charlie Kirk to block Tucker Carlson from being his keynote speaker at this upcoming December summit. So all of this is something I'd been following closely. And, I was thrilled by the reaction from the crowd at TPUSA to everything that was being said on stage, because it showed there was a rebellion taking place in the last bastion of grassroots support that Israel enjoyed. And
that's the perfect way to say it. I couldn't agree more. That was my response too, about how big a deal it is to see young conservatives cheering Tucker Carlson saying, hey, Epstein probably worked for Israel. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel at all. And he getting a loud applause for that, for Megyn Kelly to talk about, hey, he's probably a Mossad asset, or maybe that's a possibility. And for Dave Smith to lay down the proverbial hammer against Josh Hammer, pardon the pun, Josh Hammer's a hardcore Zionist. And for him to get more applause, this is a big deal, and it tells you everything you need to know about where the American right is headed. And, his article puts this perfectly, Max, talking about that Netanyahu's functionaries tried to manage Kirk on an almost daily basis. He got a lot of backlash on this. This is talked about in his first article on this as well, where, he was getting so much backlash that he was frightened by it, it says in Max's first article. Again, this is from an unnamed source that's a close friend of Charlie Kirk.
And I understood that Israel was already throwing as much money as it could at the problem to basically pay influencers. And they were very focused on the, America first, quote unquote, anti-woke influencers. They were flying them all to Israel. We could see it all unfolding. They were trying to buy as many, young, attractive women or Black influencers, Latino influencers. It was just like an all-out exploitation fest. The Israeli Foreign Ministry had ponied up $150 million per year for this. And so I knew that the pressure would be coming down on Charlie Kirk and his organization, but I didn't understand the full extent of it until he was killed. After he was killed, Netanyahu comes out and tries to claim Charlie Kirk's name, his legacy, claim him as a very close friend. Netanyahu, in a Fox News interview soon after the killing, blamed Islam and the left before it was even known who the suspect was. So he was also trying to direct Americans, to direct the rage of Americans against his enemies, the enemies of Israel. And speaking to a longtime friend of Charlie Kirk, I knew these sources just through the grapevine, and because the Trump world is actually more accessible than the world of Biden, Obama, or the Clintons, who exist. They're much more cut off from alternative media. So I was able to have conversations with some of the figures who knew Charlie Kirk. And they told me that he hated Netanyahu, that he considered Netanyahu a bully, that he was considered him a manipulator, and that when Netanyahu invited him to Israel 2 weeks before his death, as Netanyahu said in one of his videos, many videos about Charlie Kirk's death, Charlie Kirk actually refused. Netanyahu never said if he accepted or not. And he was holding a letter that I think Charlie Kirk wrote to him, but he wouldn't read the entire thing.
Yeah, all this is the case. As Max's article shows, he viewed Netanyahu as a bully, and he didn't like the fact that Netanyahu seemed to wield influence over the composition of Trump's cabinet. That's what this source said too. And this, bears repeating and talking about the fact that we have, various videos that he recorded, immediately jumping on the train and blaming Islamic radicalism for Charlie Kirk's death, all very shortly after his death. He did this right afterward in this Fox News interview. You can watch this from Ryan Grimm here. I'm not going to play this right now, but that is what he did. And this is before there was even a suspect. But this isn't even the first time Netanyahu's done that in a high profile, event like this, because the first thing he did after Trump narrowly escaped being assassinated in Butler, Pennsylvania, he also went on board to blame Iran right after the fact, and he doesn't get called out on this by the American political class because they're so controlled by the Israel lobby. He's clearly trying to manipulate the situation to draw the U.S. into wars with Iran, and which he accomplished, and there is an open war with Iran. He wants it to go full board a regime change, and I don't think we've heard the end of it. But Max, again, is totally right about this. And he's right. He didn't say, whether or not Charlie Kirk turned that offer down. And hey, timing could be involved or something like that. But all he's saying is that, unfortunately, that meeting won't happen, even though I invited him.
So that was the first part of my reporting. I wrote 3 installments of this investigation. The first one, within a few hours, had gone viral. It had like 100,000 views just on our website alone. It was clear I was really speaking to something real, and I started to get approached by more sources on the right, people I'd never talked to before, who were just wanting to pour their hearts out to me about their experiences in right-wing media and conservative mega activist circles like TPUSA, and how controlled it was by this Zionist donor class that was answering to Israel, and how there was no space for them to speak out about it. I produced a second investigation based on rumors I was hearing that I was exploring. I managed to nail down this influencer summit convened by Bill Ackman in the Hamptons, working with Charlie Kirk, where things just got even more uncomfortable in early August. And Charlie Kirk was at some point screamed at by some of the Zionist influencers who were there for questioning the Netanyahu imposed line. And he actually complained of moral blackmail about this summit. Bill Ackman called this a complete lie, but he had actually covered up the fact that the summit ever took place. And what was the real agenda of this summit? It was to buy impressions and millions of clicks for Israel among very avaricious, vapid, young conservative influencers who are basically actors or political prostitutes for whoever will buy them.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is. It's the perception, I think, in some cases rightly, that influencers have a lot of influence. I mean, again, that sounds ridiculous, but that is the case. So many people follow these people, so many people listen to what they say. And if you can pay them off to own their mind, own their viewpoints, that's going to be an effective tool, especially in this age of the new independent media, where shows like this one that you're watching right now would not have existed even 10 years ago. That is what Israel's trying to do with this donor class, trying to get the young people not to fade away as they naturally are, to getting away from this idea of Israel first and let's just support Netanyahu in whatever he wants to do, that they're trying to drive this pressure campaign. That's exactly what Bill Ackman did. And Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and a lot of people that were close to Charlie are backing up the fact that this pressure campaign happened. Tucker Carlson confirmed the fact that Charlie Kirk lost a $2 million donation in his last days because he promised to have Tucker Carlson speak at his December summit. And this is something that Max again talked about in his second article. And how ironic is it, by the way, that Robert Shillman is this guy's name. And Robert Shillman, he shills for Israel. I mean, how can you be more ironic than that this is the individual? And I'm not sure, it's not really confirmed whether he's the one that withdrew a $2 million donation, but Max's article shows that he withdrew a donation. We just don't know if it's the same person that Tucker was referring to. All right, back.
And Charlie Kirk was supposed to preside over this whole thing. So he comes out of that summit and goes on Megyn Kelly's podcast, and you can see that he's venting, that he's very angry. And he's sort of in a state of psychological agony. And he complains that he has less ability to criticize Israel than an Israeli does. And it's because of what he calls stakeholders, referring to the big Jewish Zionist donors that made him who he was.
Yeah, I think Max said it all right there, and that's absolutely true. That is part of that Megyn Kelly episode, just to be fair to this story and handling it honestly. Again, if you watch that whole interview, it's a great cross-section of where Charlie Kirk was at in terms of Israel. At times, the two agreed that, hey, you can't trust any of the pictures coming out of Gaza that show emaciated or, killed children, because that's just Hamas propaganda. And at other times, he does express that frustration. Here, let's just watch him do that to Megyn Kelly.
All of a sudden, I host a person that I moderate the debate of, mind you, right? And I give equal time to Josh Hammer, equal time to a pro-Israel advocate, and my moral character is being put into question. And so I think it's a hyper paranoid, we're just going to try to, we're going to just stamp out everything type of practice. But it goes to the point where if, for example, if I have less ability sometimes online to criticize the Israeli government without backlash than actual Israelis do. And that's really, really weird, isn't it, Megan? That's not right. All of a sudden,
Yeah, I mean, that is weird. It's weird that it's less controversial to criticize individual American states and to organize boycotts against individual states because they might not have, a social policy that you like. Classic examples, depending on which side of the aisle you are in, is California. I can't stand them because of their welfare state or how woke they are, or Texas because of how, how free the gun laws are and lack of gun restrictions and, cultural conservatism. Those states are boycotted by various political forces throughout the country, criticized routinely. But if you criticize Israel, that's a whole nother ballgame, and Charlie was articulating it perfectly. And it's a bigger deal when you're someone that owns and operates probably the most influential young conservative organization in the entire country. He probably was the third biggest conservative influencer in the entire country. I think only Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson probably wielded more overall influence, and he probably wielded more influence on younger people. But you can see his frustrations just leaping out of that video. They're real, man. This can't be fabricated, this sort of outburst, and maybe that's the wrong word for it. I think it's a genuine reflection of what he was feeling. He had a balancing act to do. He had to engage with both the young influencers or young activists in his organization, many of which were turning against Israel or, not caring or not wanting to prioritize that issue over other issues. And he also had to cater to the rich Zionist donor class that Max Blumenthal just talked about. So he was in some ways, a rock and a hard place. And that's why his mentality and views as he articulated them on Israel were so varied in so many ways. And ultimately, it's hard to know his true opinions on Israel to some extent. I think you see him to an extent here, but he had to weigh those things in running this organization that had to cater to both views in some ways. And that's where I think we're at. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that Charlie Kirk kind of had a love-hate relationship with Israel as a anti-Zionist who's not a fan of the Israeli government, and especially Israeli influence in my country and the U.S. tied to the hip at Israel. As a big critic of that, I thought some of the things he said were disgusting. So to me, he was, a Zionist. But he wasn't a Ben Shapiro Zionist or a Mark Levin Zionist. He was starting to question some of the prevailing narratives. You could see the gears spinning in his head, putting these things together, understanding them rightly, but still defending Israel. He would constantly say, I want them to win, whatever that means. If they win, is that if you succeed in ethnically cleansing Gaza? You know, he never said it that way, but that's what we have to take from Israel winning. Their end game is that. They talk about that. What else would it be? You know, it's not retrieving the hostages. They've had ample opportunity to do that, but they violated the ceasefire when Hamas was willing to do that. And they killed hostage negotiators in Qatar. So that's where we're at. But I really appreciated this. Max's journalism on this story has been absolutely superb. No matter where you fall on the debate of the FBI investigation or who's culpable for killing Charlie Kirk, did, you know, the one apprehended act alone, all these questions regardless, this is a story because it's a microcosm for how much influence and pressure is wielded not only against private organizations by the Israel lobby, but also our government. And that is a story worth talking about. It's not going to be the end of this in the United States on the right. You're going to see more stories about undue influence by a foreign government on the American people that's actually true. Not Russiagate and not Qatar has insane influence in the United States. But Israel first is the mentality. But what do you think? Is Max Blumenthal right? Did Charlie Kirk have a love-hate relationship with Israel? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you to Boston Community Church for hosting this interview. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support my channel. I'll tip my hat to you in appreciation if you do that. And in return, I will give you access to all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.